They feed on control. They survive on your reactions. They twist your love, your anger, even your silence into fuel. But what if there was a way to flip the script? Not by yelling, not by begging, not even by exposing them. What if the most brutal revenge was none at all? See, narcissists don't fear being hated, they fear being irrelevant. The worst pain you can inflict isn't loud, it's quiet. It's your peace, your indifference, your refusal to play the game. Because the moment you stop needing to prove anything, needing to be understood, or needing them to feel guilt, that's when you become untouchable. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly how to torture the narcissist without lowering yourself, without breaking your own integrity, and without saying a word. Not for petty revenge, but to reclaim your power, protect your peace, and make sure they never get a grip on your mind again. Let's begin. To understand how to dismantle a narcissist without ever raising your voice, you have to understand their core wound, because that wound is the entry point to every crack in their armor. See, a narcissist's entire identity is built on one fragile illusion, that they are significant, admired, envied, and in control. But underneath that mask lies an ocean of insecurity so deep they can't even look at it themselves. They've spent a lifetime building psychological scaffolding to avoid feeling unworthy. So when someone threatens that illusion, even with silence, it causes a kind of emotional collapse. That's why silence cuts deeper than confrontation. When you argue, cry, beg, or rage, it confirms their importance. You're giving them energy, and that energy is the supply they feed on. But when you go quiet, indifferent, and completely unfazed, you're not just walking away, you're sending a message straight to their subconscious. You're not worth reacting to. And that message is unbearable, because now they're forced to sit with themselves, and they have no one to mirror their fake identity back to them. No stage, no audience, just the emptiness they spend every day running from. That's the torture. Not being hated, but being nothing in your world. The narcissist fears irrelevance more than exposure. They can manipulate, blame, twist stories, even rewrite reality, but they can't rewrite your silence. It hangs in the air, uneditable, unspinnable. It forces them to feel powerless, because they can't use it to provoke you, punish you, or pull you back. It forces them to face the fact that their performance no longer commands attention. And once you stop applauding, the illusion starts to crumble. They spiral, not because you left, but because you didn't need to announce it, because you didn't explain, you didn't try to get them to understand. And that, to the narcissist, is emotional death. They can survive being hated. They can't survive being ignored. So if you want to torture a narcissist without a single word, understand this. Their real fear isn't abandonment, it's anonymity. Strip them of the role they were playing in your life, and you're not just walking away. You're cutting them off from the fantasy of being larger than life. And for someone who lives inside a mirror, that's shattering. Narcissists don't crave love, they crave attention, control, and emotional chaos, because those are the lifelines that keep their full self intact. This is what psychologists call narcissistic supply. Any form of emotional energy, whether it's admiration or outrage, that reinforces their sense of power and significance. And here's the truth they don't want you to know. When you starve that supply, you take away the one thing they're addicted to. The most effective way to torture a narcissist isn't through revenge, it's by becoming emotionally unavailable. Not cold, not cruel, but unreachable. They thrive when you engage, when you try to make them see your side, when you try to hold them accountable. But the second you stop explaining yourself, stop reacting, stop needing anything from them, you become a black hole to their manipulation. They can't anchor into anything. And the beauty is this, you don't have to do anything dramatic. You simply stop feeding the beast. No arguing when they bait you. No closure seeking when they ghost. No validation when they suddenly resurface pretending nothing happened. Just calm, quiet, grounded detachment. When they try to provoke you and you respond with neutrality, it drives them mad. Not because you're being passive, but because you're showing that their chaos no longer has access to your peace. Every time they try to ignite drama and you remain unmoved, they experience withdrawal, like an addict cut off from their drug. The narcissist expects to be the center of your emotional universe. So when you stop orbiting them, they feel small, exposed, and irrelevant. They'll do anything to regain that control. Guilt-tripping, fake apologies, love bombing, or even creating new drama just to get a rise out of you. But if you don't react, they begin to rot inside their own insecurity. They start questioning if they ever had power to begin with. That's the shift. When you become emotionally independent, you strip them of their identity. You make them feel invisible without ever blocking them. You become the mirror that no longer reflects their desired image, and that to them is unbearable. It's not the silence that tortures them, it's what the silence says. It says, "You are not significant enough to disturb my peace." And that truth dismantles them more than any insult ever could. You don't need to raise your voice, just raise your standards. And when you do, the narcissist begins to suffocate on the very emptiness they used to inflict on others. The moment you stop chasing closure from a narcissist is the moment you start reclaiming your power. See, narcissists never give true closure, not because they don't understand what they did, but because closure threatens their control. If you walk away with clarity, with peace, with your head held high, they lose their grip. So instead, they leave doors half open, conversations unfinished, and conflicts unresolved, keeping you emotionally entangled in a web of confusion, guilt, and longing. Why? Because confusion creates dependency. If you're stuck replaying events in your mind, wondering what went wrong or blaming yourself, you're still giving them space in your head. That's the trap. But the greatest power move is to close the door yourself. Not out of anger, but out of self-respect. You decide that the lack of accountability is the answer. You stop needing them to admit they were wrong. You stop waiting for the apology that will never come, because here's the truth. Needing closure from a narcissist is like asking a liar to validate the truth. It will only keep you stuck. When you choose to give yourself closure, you break the cycle. You rob them of the ability to keep you hooked. And this kills them. Because narcissists don't fear being hated. They fear being irrelevant to the person they once controlled. Closure in your hands becomes a weapon. Not for revenge, but for liberation. You begin to write the narrative instead of being a character in their delusion. You realize that their silence was a response, that their disrespect was a choice, and that your healing no longer requires their permission. They wanted you confused so you'd stay entangled. But once you stop asking why and start saying enough, they become powerless. That moment when you stop needing them to understand how badly they hurt you and instead understand how badly you needed to leave, that's when the torture begins for them. Because nothing is more humiliating to a narcissist than realizing the person they once toyed with no longer needs an explanation. You didn't walk away bitter, you walked away clean, and that clean exit haunts them, not because they lost someone to argue with, but because they lost someone they could no longer confuse. That's how you win. That's how you take back your mind, not through their validation, but by refusing to beg for it in the first place. The most brutal punishment for a narcissist is watching you rise without them, quietly, gracefully, and completely unfazed. See, narcissists don't only want to win control over your emotions, they want to define your identity. They want to be the reason you feel worthy, desirable, powerful. So when you reclaim all of that without their presence, or worse, after they discarded or disrespected you, it destroys the illusion they've built about their own importance. They operate off the fantasy that they are irreplaceable, unforgettable, central to your story. But when you begin to evolve in silence, when you glow up emotionally, mentally, and even physically without any attempt to prove it to them, it stings in ways no insult ever could. Because your growth without them becomes a reflection of just how unnecessary they truly were. And even if they pretend not to notice, they feel it. Narcissists obsessively monitor the impact they've had on people. They want to believe they've left a permanent scar or an empty space that no one else can fill. But when you stop performing your healing and start actually healing, when your peace isn't a front, it's a lifestyle, they begin to panic. Why? Because your strength exposes their weakness. Your evolution reminds them that all the drama, gaslighting, and manipulation failed to destroy you. It becomes undeniable proof that they were not the defining moment in your life. They were just a painful lesson. You want to torture a narcissist? Stop competing with them. Stop reacting to them. Stop trying to make them see. Instead, just become better. So much better that their memory becomes irrelevant. You don't need to block them. Let them watch. Let them sit with the fact that you've rebuilt without them, that you're glowing in ways they tried to dim. The real revenge isn't in proving them wrong. It's in becoming someone who doesn't need to prove anything at all. That unspoken transformation is devastating to them. Because in the silence of your success, they hear everything they tried to silence in you: confidence, clarity, closure. And the most unbearable part? You did it without stooping to their level. You did it without the drama. You did it by walking away and never looking back. And in their world, where control is everything, nothing is more painful than knowing they've lost the one thing they couldn't control: your peace. If you want to torture a narcissist without ever saying a word, master the art of indifference. Not fake indifference, not passive-aggressive silence. Real, grounded, effortless detachment. Because narcissists are emotional thieves. They survive by stealing your energy, your reactions, your attention. They thrive on extremes: love or hate, admiration or outrage. What they cannot tolerate is neutrality. Your indifference is the emotional equivalent of starvation to them. When you no longer respond to their games, their guilt trips, or their provocations, they're forced to confront the one thing they spend their entire lives avoiding: their own emptiness. And it doesn't matter whether you were discarded or the one who walked away. The moment they realize they can no longer make you flinch, no longer trigger anger, sadness, longing, or even curiosity, you become a mirror to their irrelevance. This drives them insane because narcissists don't just want to be remembered, they want to be unforgettable. And nothing wounds that fantasy more than your silence. They might send bait messages, watch your stories, post things that seem directed at you, or casually resurface in your orbit. But when you no longer bite, when you treat their existence the same way you treat an old pair of shoes you outgrew years ago, it breaks them. Because they realize not only are you free, you don't even care that they see it. And this isn't about revenge. It's about reclaiming your emotional energy. It's about choosing not to be a puppet in their theater of chaos. See, the narcissist's greatest fear is not your hatred, it's your peace. Hatred is still a bond. Peace is the scissors. It cuts them off from the supply they were banking on for life. And when your peace is real, when you don't need to pretend, when you've stopped checking for them, stopped imagining conversations, stopped needing closure, you become dangerous. Because now nothing they do matters. They can rage, lie, post, flirt, guilt, or even beg. But you've closed the emotional account. And once they realize the transaction is no longer available, that they can't deposit shame and withdraw control, the torture becomes existential. They become a ghost in your story, while you become someone they can never reach again. That's the kind of pain they can't ignore. That's the kind of ending they never saw coming. To torture a narcissist on the deepest level, you must do what they cannot. Live with authenticity, not performance, not image, but real, grounded authenticity that doesn't rely on validation or applause. Because while they're constantly curating a version of themselves that looks powerful, desirable, or untouchable, their entire identity is a fragile illusion built on external approval. When you stop playing by that script and start embracing who you truly are, flaws, scars, depth, strength, they begin to crumble internally. Why? Because your self-acceptance makes their mask feel heavier. Your freedom becomes their prison. Narcissists spend their lives hiding from themselves. They can't face their shame, their guilt, or their insecurities, so they create a character, a mask, that seduces others into feeding their fantasy. But when you refuse to play the role of co-star in that delusion, when you stop flattering the image and start seeing the truth, you become a threat to their entire system. And when you rise with grace and integrity, without needing to prove your worth to anyone, least of all them, you expose their hollowness. You become a walking contradiction to everything they built their ego on. They say they're better off without you? Good. Let them watch as you build a life so aligned, so unshakable, that it makes their lies irrelevant. You don't need revenge posts. You don't need to flaunt your growth. Just live in such a way that it becomes impossible to deny. Laugh without pretending. Speak without fear. Rest without guilt. Show up for yourself, not to be seen, but to be whole. This is the one thing they can't replicate. They can mimic charm. They can fake humility. They can even copy success. But they can't fabricate soul. They can't fake peace. And they can't manufacture the kind of quiet power that comes from doing the deep work they run from every single day. You want to torture them? Be everything they pretended to be. And do it without bitterness, without spectacle, just unwavering alignment. Because every time you move with intention, every time you love without desperation, every time you shine without needing attention, you remind them of everything they're not, and everything they could never break in you. One of the most effective and psychologically devastating ways to torture a narcissist is to outgrow them, to evolve so far beyond the version of yourself they once manipulated that they no longer recognize you, no longer know how to reach you, and no longer have the keys to your emotional kingdom. This isn't about fake glow-ups or surface-level transformations. It's about deep, internal evolution, the kind they never believed you were capable of. See, narcissists build their control on one foundation: the belief that you'll always be available in some way, available to fix things, to defend yourself, to prove your worth, to respond to their pain, or to fall into the same patterns. But when you begin to outgrow their version of you, when you stop identifying with the wounded, reactive self they used to control, you force them to confront a brutal truth. They no longer have power because the person they once manipulated no longer exists. And that creates a fracture in their sense of superiority. They counted on the version of you that needed answers, that craved closure, that chased love through chaos. But now you've detached, leveled up, healed. Now, they're left shouting at an empty stage, while you're no longer even in the theater. Outgrowing them means not just surviving the pain, but using it as fuel to refine your standards, your boundaries, your focus. It means creating a life where their presence would feel absurd, like inviting poison back into a healed body. They'll feel this shift. Not because you announce it, but because your energy no longer flinches in their direction. You don't seek revenge, you seek clarity. You don't chase validation, you embody worth. You don't replay the past, you build a future so far removed from their influence that it rewrites the story entirely. And this is where the torture sets in, because narcissists believe they are unforgettable. They believe they are the center of your emotional world. But when you outgrow them, you don't hate them, you forget them, you don't curse them, you thank them for the lesson and move forward. That level of self-possession, that refusal to regress, that total absence of emotional tether, it eats them alive. Because it forces them to realize they were never the sun in your sky, only a passing storm you survived and outgrew. And once they realize that, the game is over. The final and most silent form of torture for a narcissist is to thrive in peace without them ever knowing if they mattered. See, narcissists don't need love to survive. They need proof that they still take up space in your mind. Even your hate gives them oxygen. Even your healing, if flaunted in their direction, reassures them that they once had power. But when you disappear from their emotional radar, not with rage, not with a grand exit, but with absolute emotional indifference, you starve their ego of what it craves most: significance. You become an unsolved puzzle, and that uncertainty is what burns them from the inside out. Because narcissists need resolution. They need the last word, the final scene, the power to define the narrative. But when you walk away without offering closure, without broadcasting your glow-up, and without falling into the trap of proving how well you're doing, you rob them of control over the storyline. That void, that unknown, it becomes unbearable. They wonder, do you think of them? Do you still feel anything? Did they ever really leave a mark? And the worst part, the part they can't handle, is never knowing. Your silence becomes louder than any confrontation. Your indifference becomes more painful than any insult. You don't just end the chapter, you remove the book from the shelf and never speak its name again. That's how you reclaim your narrative, not with vengeance, but with distance. Not by showing them who you've become, but by living a life so complete, so aligned, that there's no longer a space where they could fit. You don't just move on, you transcend. You build a reality where your joy is not a reaction, your peace is not performative, and your strength is not about proving anything to anyone, but about no longer needing to. And that's what haunts them, not what you said, but what you didn't. Not the scars you carry, but how gracefully you walk with them. Not the revenge you plotted, but the peace you mastered. Because in the end, nothing tortures a narcissist more than the quiet realization that they were just a footnote in your story, and you've long since turned the page. You don't need to raise your voice, seek revenge, or prove your worth to anyone who tried to tear it down. The deepest form of power is silence, the purest form of healing is distance, and the highest form of revenge is freedom. If you're watching this, it means you're not here to stay broken. You're here to rise with clarity, with strength, with self-respect. So let them wonder, let them spiral, let them sit in the silence they once forced on you, because now it's their turn to feel the void, and you're done performing for people who only showed up when it served them. If this resonated, subscribe for more content that reminds you of your worth, your power, and your peace. Drop a comment if you've ever walked away from someone who underestimated your silence. And remember, your story is yours now. Own it, loudly, proudly, and with zero apologies.